Good morning, North America. Good afternoon, Europe, and good evening to everyone watching in India. This is US Election Watch. I'm Allister D'Souza, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. The headlines. Harris and Walz campaign target battleground state, Georgia. Harris returns to campaign trail, zooms in on swing states. Harris-Walz to give interviews since launching their campaign. Harris-Walz's first in-depth interview together on the Democratic ticket. Trump adds ex-Democrats Tulsi Gabbard, JFK Jr. to his transition team. Meanwhile, over 200 ex-Republican staffers endorse Harris. Trump faces revised U.S. indictment in election subversion case. Trump accused of conspiracy to defraud and obstruct proceedings. Our top story, a sense of deja vu all over again. US prosecutors have filed revised charges against Donald Trump in his alleged attempts to interfere in the 2020 election after he lost. If you think you've heard this before, well, you have. A similar case earlier was thrown into doubt after the Supreme Court ruled presidents have broad immunity for official acts. So what's different this time around? The words in the charges have been changed, referring to Trump as a political candidate rather than a sitting president.
In fresh legal trouble for former President Donald Trump, federal prosecutors in the U.S. filed a revised version of an indictment accusing him of plotting to overturn the 2020 election. The pared-down indictment removes several pages of allegations following the U.S. Supreme Court decision that found Trump at least partially immune from prosecution related to his official acts as president. Trump slammed the indictment by terming it ridiculous and asking for it to be dismissed immediately. His Republican running mate, J.D. Vance, attacked special counsel Jack Smith, labeling the indictment as election interference.
I don't think that it changes anything legally. I think it's clearly an effort to try to do more election interference from Jack Smith. He should be ashamed of himself, and it's one of the reasons why we have to win, because he should not be anywhere near power.
The most significant change to the original indictment is the removal of the section alleging Trump tried to involve the Justice Department into supporting his false claims that the election had been rigged against him. The indictment contains the same 4 charges accusing Trump of conspiring to reverse his election loss to President Joe Biden. Experts say the indictment was highly unlikely to proceed to trial ahead of the November 5th presidential election. However, it seems the indictment is likely to have an impact on the Trump campaign as it thrusts his alleged criminal history to the forefront in the crucial months of the 2024 campaign and plays into the hands of Harris and her allies who have recently started attacking Trump's criminal record while campaigning. The indictment also sheds light on Trump's huge personal stake in winning the elections. Trump will undergo another legal wrangling this month as he is due to be sentenced on September 18th in the criminal hush money case, less than 2 months before the presidential election. With Vishal Vivek, Gargi Rawat for NDTV World.
Now, for more, we're joined by Voice of America's Chief National Correspondent, Steve Herman. Thanks very much, Steve, for joining us. Steve, firstly, how surprised should we really be about these revised charges?
Well, I think a little bit surprised because I think some people, maybe including Donald Trump himself, thought this was one of the cases that was now out of the way, but it's rearing its head back again, although as was pointed out in the report, we're not likely to see really anything progress for this to end up in court before the November election. But it is another Damocles sword hanging over his head that if he were to lose the election, he does face some significant jeopardy if convicted of any of these charges.
Steve, now the charges have been carefully tweaked, keeping in mind what the Supreme Court ruling had to say about presidential immunity. But can the charges really pack in that punch that the special counsel is really hoping for this time around?
Well, that's certainly the hope of the special counsel, that they've pared this down now. It removes those objections as a result of that Supreme Court ruling, kicking out what were considered official acts that the president was conducted and putting it more into the vein of him acting as a political candidate. And interestingly, some of the interactions that he had with his vice president, Michael Pence. Now, there is a deadline for Friday for both sides to tell the judge how they want to proceed with this case. We expect that the judge will want to move this along, but very unlikely to see it expedited to the point that Trump ends up back in the courtroom dealing with this case, as I said, before the election.
Now, Steve, on the one hand, this might seem like this is great news for the Harris campaign, but in many ways, this also gives added ammunition to the Trump campaign as well to say, look, this is a witch hunt, the very reason we need to get rid of the Democrats from the White House.
You're right, Allister. I think that both sides are going to try to use this to their advantage. Is it really going to make a difference for the vast majority of the electorate? Probably not. But when we're talking about the election, coming down most likely to a few swing states and perhaps as little as 1,000 or so votes in some of those states, then if you can sway that small number of people either to go out and vote or not go out and vote, or maybe people that were sitting on the fence going one way or the other, it does have the potential, among other things, to sway the outcome of the election.
We're coming back to him. Right, Steve. So just stay with us. We'll try and come back to you in just a bit for a reaction and something else. But let's turn to what's now another major blow to Donald Trump. Over 200 former Republican staffers have endorsed Kamala Harris instead of their own party candidate, Trump. The group disagrees with Harris's policy, but they say the alternative is simply untenable. This is not the first time this has happened in U.S. history. The same group had opposed Trump in the previous presidential election in 2020.
Being inside Trump's White House was terrifying. But what keeps me up at night is what'll happen if he gets back there.
I wasn't just a Trump supporter. I was a true believer. I was one of his closest advisors. The Trump family became my family. I saw him when the cameras were off. Behind closed doors, Trump mocks his supporters. He calls them basement dwellers.
Days after former U.S. President Donald Trump's aides slammed the 78-year-old at the Democratic National Convention and threw their weight behind Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris. More than 200 former aides to George W. Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, all big Republican names, declared in an open letter that they are backing Harris over Trump. While Romney, former President Bush, and many other high-profile Republicans skipped the party's national convention last month, the Harris campaign did its best to highlight the support of anti-Trump Republicans present at the DNC last week. The signatories to the letter say that they will be voting for Harris in November and warn that another Trump term would hurt people and weaken America's institutions. The letter matters as it further highlights the ongoing tussles in the Republican Party over the persistent influence of the Make America Great Again movement. Several dozen Bush, Romney, and McCain staffers had backed Joe Biden in a similar way when he defeated Trump in 2020. The letter could also be aimed at the independent voters who are expected to play a key role in the election, likely to be determined by a thin margin.
This campaign is about who we fight for.
Vishal Vivek for NDTV World.
Let's take a quick look at some other stories now in the spotlight as far as the US elections go. Now, Harris and the Walz ticket, they return to the campaign trail Heading to Georgia, a state that Democrats narrowly won in 2020 and could play a decisive role in this year's election. Meanwhile, Harris and Walz give their first joint interview on Thursday, making it the first time that Harris and Walz have sat down together with a journalist for an in-depth interview, on-the-record conversation since President Joe Biden ended his bid. Let's get you more from our Voice of America correspondent, Steve Herman, who is still with us. Now, Steve, as Harris and Walz, they head to Georgia, how crucial is the state of Georgia given what happened with Biden and his narrow win there the previous time around?
Yes, Allister, Georgia was considered after that debate that Joe Biden and Donald Trump had to really be going into the territory of the Republicans, and that it was not going to be a swing state that the Democrats were going to have in play. That has totally changed now with Kamala Harris now at the top of the ticket. Georgia is most definitely in play. Georgia also has 2 Democratic Party U.S. senators, although rural Georgia, I can tell you, is very much deep red, but it's these larger population centers where the Democrats now are hoping to pick up just enough votes to be able to take Georgia, and for her to go out on this bus with Governor Walz to some of the more rural areas does demonstrate that they're hoping to pick up votes in some of these counties that might not be very deep red, and maybe just enough for them to take Georgia.
Steve, what are we expecting as far as that interview is concerned? I am, like you and many other people, quite excited to hear what Walz and Kamala have to say in an interview rather than hearing them through speeches which may have been scripted. So what are we going to likely hear from the two of them, do you think?
Well, I think it's going to be more about how they respond to the questions that are going to come from the CNN reporter Dana Bash than the substance of what we say. Their talking points will be very well prepared. Obviously, when you're in that position, you know that you're going to get some tough questions and some tough follow-up questions. And in some of the previous interviews as vice president, Kamala Harris has not performed all that well. There was a interview that happened with Lester Holt of NBC News, where she was mocked about her answer about going to the border and not going to the border, that sort of thing. So that's sort of the low bar that was set the last time. And it's also very interesting that she is going to have Governor Walz by her side. It's not going to be a one-on-one interview. He has a very folksy demeanor, as you may be aware of now, and that could soften up things. This is very, very crucial, I would say, along with the debate against Donald Trump coming up. This is going to be the one opportunity where people are going to be looking very closely to see how Kamala Harris performs and reacts and how she comes off in a much more stressful situation than just getting up and talking off the teleprompter.
Indeed, all good points there. Steve, just one last question before we let you go. Of course, we'd be watching for that interview, but simultaneously in live time, watching for what Trump's going to say on social media, like he did at the Democratic convention when Kamala Harris spoke, keyboard warrior there, note after note from Trump. So we're going to expect something along those lines this time around for sure, I'm guessing.
Yes, during her acceptance speech, I counted more than 40 posts that Donald Trump made in real time, real time criticizing her speech. Perhaps he'll be doing the same thing during that interview. Certainly after that interview, we can expect that he's going to say some things about her performance.
Steve Herman from the Voice of America there. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Let's now turn to a defining issue that could determine who will win the White House. It's the economy. Americans are asking who will be the right candidate for me to make my life better at the grocery store, at the gas pumps, and of course when I file my tax returns. For more, we're joined by Adelle Nazarian, American political analyst. Thanks very much, Adelle, for joining us here this morning. Now, Adelle, poll after poll shows that Americans want a candidate who will deliver on the economy. Broadly, what do we know about what Harris and Trump have proposed on what they plan to do if they get into the White House?
I was muted. Hi, I'm back. So thank you. It's great to be on with you. During the DNC convention, Kamala Harris did say that she will make it a core tenet of her tax policy, her economic policy, to reduce taxes, will actually make sure that no taxes are raised on the middle class, those Americans that are making under $400,000 a year. They won't see a tax increase. That's a continuation of policy, of course, in the Biden administration. But the thing is that, that it sounds wonderful, and it's so important to note that America's middle class has been suffering. But the question then becomes, even if she does go forward, if she becomes president and does try to implement that, she's going to have to get through the Congress and the House, the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. And based on what Biden had to endure with, being blocked by Republican members of Congress for his own tax policy, it remains to be seen if President Kamala Harris, would be able to accomplish that. The difference is also that, of course, Donald Trump has been wonderful at lowering taxes and helping, to a great degree, the upper middle class, the higher earners in America's economy. But at the end of the day, there have been questions. A lot of scrutiny has come on him because they question, well, you're helping the uber rich in our country, but are you helping the lower and middle classes? And so it kind of comes to push to shove. Who's actually going to be able to implement what they say they're going to implement? And are the tariffs, for example, that Donald Trump is going to implement if he is to become president, are they actually going to inadvertently end up harming the middle class by raising the cost of everyday groceries, gas, other things? So it's a head-to-head battle.
Yeah, let's talk about a little bit about the middle class. Adelle, on the one hand, we hear about how growth in the US is the envy of many European countries. We hear about a resilient economy, but then there's this perception on the ground that's really not the case. Go to a grocery store, for example, milk costs too much, people say, eggs are expensive, but the fact that inflation has actually cooled, but this is something that could really hurt Kamala Harris. I really want to know, why haven't the Democrats been able to get that economic messaging across, if you like?
That's a great question. I think that traditionally and historically, Republicans have been better overall for the economy. They've been better for the end user, which is the American individual, the American family. And you're absolutely right. The cost of living, the cost of groceries has absolutely skyrocketed. I talked to relatives of mine living in different states. I mean, of course, in the coastal states where we are, Washington, D.C., California, New York, that's definitely higher there. But when it comes to the Democrats being able to get their messaging across, they just haven't really been seen as the party to help the everyday Americans. They're kind of seen more so historically as the party to serve the the underdog, the American who is not even making enough to be considered part of, let's say, the middle upper class. And for so many years, the Republicans have been able to be spot on with their messaging because they've actually had the experience of being tuned into and actually appealing to that demographic. So the Democrats have to do a little bit of rebranding. I think it's very admirable that Kamala Harris has gone ahead and adopted, if you want to talk about that, a more conservative economic principle when it comes to the tax policy she's hoping to implement. I think it's more of so a response to taking on Trump and hoping to win the presidency come November. But I think that's the main issue, is that just historically, the Democrats haven't made that a top priority. They've always been focused more on, let's say the cultural aspect of things, the different minorities, things of that nature, and never had to worry about the economic part of it.
Now, Adele, sticking with inflation, Trump has said drill, baby, drill, one of Trump's key ways, he says, to combat inflation. His rationale, increasing domestic production of oil and gas would lead to a decline in prices. How sound an argument is that, really? Because given that oil production and prices are really determined at the international level.
You know, at the end of the day, it will affect us because we are also, as much as we're of a, output nation of those commodities, we also are consumers. We're a highly consumer-oriented nation. And so even though the international, community does end up setting the price for that, Trump is a master negotiator. And I have no doubt that if push comes to shove, his meetings with different members of the foreign community, different leaders, would probably find him negotiating, if he is to become president again, believe it or not, gas prices that will affect the end American user. And I do believe that he's capable of doing that. The same will be looked upon to Kamala Harris, President Harris, let's say. She will be responsible for building and forging those relationships with the other heads of state and doing a bit of a give and take. Nothing is for free. It's you have to do something to get something in return. And so she'll be responsible to forge those relationships where she can help bring down the cost of prices globally. And that's really the beauty and also the difficult part of being the head of the leader, the commander in chief, the head of the, I think, most powerful nation on earth. It's a big responsibility. Everyone's watching.
Right. Everyone certainly is watching. Adele, thanks so much. Have a great day ahead. That's Adelle Nazarian. She is a political analyst joining us there live here on NDTV. Now, in other news, former President Donald Trump sparked a buzz online with some social media posts suggesting that pop icon Taylor Swift is backing him in the upcoming election. Trump notably harbored a grudge against Taylor Swift, so at first, many people found that rather surprising, those pictures. Now let's dive deeper into those images. Take a closer look at your screens right now. These are a series of AI, artificial intelligence generated images or pictures that are turning heads. One image features Taylor Swift dressed as Uncle Sam with the headline, "Taylor wants you to vote for Donald Trump." Another shows a crowd of young women sporting matching Swifties for Trump t-shirts. Here's more in our report.
Former US President Donald Trump sparked a buzz online with some social media posts suggesting that Taylor Swift is backing him in the upcoming November election. Trump notably harbored a grudge against Taylor Swift, so at first, many people found these images that are playing on your screen very surprising. Now let's dive deeper into these images. Just take a quick close look at your screens right now. These are a series of AI-generated pictures that are turning heads. One image actually features Taylor Swift dressed as Uncle Sam with the headline, "Taylor wants you to vote for Donald Trump." Another shows a crowd of young women wearing matching shirts that say Swifties for Trump. Now, major companies like OpenAI and Microsoft are actually backing a new California bill that aims to make it easier to spot AI-generated content. The bill, known as AB 3211, is set for a final vote this week, and if passed, AB 3211 will require tech companies to add special labels to photos, videos, and audio created by AI. Now, this means that instead of just hiding the information in technical metadata, the labels will be visible in a way that's easy for everyone to understand. This move comes from the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, which includes these tech giants. They've been involved in developing a standard for marking AI-generated content, and earlier this year, a trade group representing these companies opposed the bill, calling it too difficult to implement. However, changes to the bill seem to have won them over. Major companies like OpenAI and Microsoft are backing this new California bill that aims to make it easier to spot AI-generated content. In fact, this means that instead of just hiding the information in technical metadata, the labels will be visible, as I mentioned, in a way that's legible and easy for everyone to understand. Deepfakes, which are realistic but fake content made with AI, have become a major concern, and they can convincingly mimic voices and appearances, making it difficult to distinguish between what's real and what's not. So this technology has been used to impersonate celebrities and political figures, raising worries about misinformation, scams, and a loss of trust. So this move is very crucial. It's been welcomed by tech giants. Changes to the bill seem to have won them over, but this bill's key provisions would mandate that AI developers add a digital watermark to their content, similar to how photos metadata records details the location and time. So platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook would then need to label content in a way that clearly informs users that it's AI generated. The National Institute of Standards and Technology will now work on finalizing these rules, and experts are quite concerned actually about the role AI has generated and the role it's playing, because the US Department of Homeland Security as well has warned that generative artificial intelligence could threaten the elections in November. It has already been prominent in some elections, such as in Indonesia.
That's all we have time for here on US Election Watch. I'm Allister D'Souza in Washington, D.C.